WFYI for side effects. Oh, thank you, Chelsea. For side effects, public media, which is a healthcare, public health media collaboration. That's a really lame way of putting it. Robin Rockel, give us a wave, Robin. Does engagement for the Indiana network of stations across Indiana. And Tasha Gibson, yay, does engagement for WFYI's education desk. And then I guess I would ask you guys to go around and just quickly introduce yourselves. And then I don't know, Robin, Brittany, and Tasha, whether you wanted to start off by saying something or you just want to be open to questions. Either way is great. Okay, Daylina, I'll just call on you because it makes it easier.
Hi,
Daylina's on the Starship Enterprise, as you can tell.
big Star Trek fan. So yeah, I'm Daylina Miller. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm a multimedia reporter at WUSF Public Media in Tampa. And I'm very excited about this because we are looking to plan our first listening session in early March. And I have never done a listening session. We have done listening sessions at the station in the past, but I've never been a part of them. So I'm learning a lot and I'm looking forward to this conversation. And I apologize in advance that I'll have to duck out at 2:30 because I have an America Amplified related meeting with one of our media partners for that listening session. So I'm glad we're recording this. So thank you all for being here.
Okay, Shane.
Hi, I'm Shane Noweska. I'm the digital editor at KTOO. We're working with America Amplified to do some outreach work with the Filipino communities in Alaska. And part of our project is to cover the Philippine national elections. And we are trying to use listening sessions or a listening session to sort of figure out, sort of wade the waters and see what people are thinking about leading up to the elections.
Awesome. Aaron.
Hello, everyone. I'm Erin Adams, membership manager with Blue Ridge Public Radio. I'm supporting Catherine Comp, our director of content, in our America Amplified initiative this year, and looking forward to learning more about listening sessions and all the good stuff. Thanks.
Lily.
Hi, I'm Lily. I'm the regional reporter with Blue Ridge Public Radio. I'm working on a couple different listening projects with our community, specifically with the Eastern Band of Cherokee that I cover here in Western North Carolina youth. Thanks.
Catherine.
Hey everybody, I'm Catherine Comp, Director of Content at Blue Ridge Public Radio, and working with Erin and Lily and Michelle Keenan. She's our membership director. Part of our strategic plan is to do community listening sessions. So we are very excited to see how other stations are doing them and learn from you all.
One more BPR, Michelle Keenan.
So I'm Michelle Keenan and I'm the Associate Director of Development at BPR, and just kind of coming up to speed on the America Amplified project and learning about the listening sessions and the various projects that y'all are working on.
Thank you. Rima.
Hi.
We're just doing brief intros.
Rima Dial. It's my fault that me and my team are late. We just had a management meeting, so blame me. Rima Dial, General Manager from WSHU Public Radio, Fairfield, Connecticut. Tom and Janice, you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Tom Kuzer, Program Director from WSHU.
We're glad to have a man on the call.
And Terry will be a little late, but he'll also be joining us. Go ahead, Janice.
So I apologize, I'm having trouble with my camera, but I am here. I'm Janice Portentoso, WSHU's Senior Director for Strategy and Communications, I think is my brand new title, and I'm happy to meet you all.
Glad to have you guys. Jennifer?
Jennifer Pemberton, this is the first time I've seen my hair today. And I don't know what's happening over here. I'm at KTOO in Juneau, and I am the vice president for news here, and I'm working with Shane on this engagement around the Philippines election for overseas voters here in Alaska.
Alexa.
Hi, I'm Alexia. I work at WAMU in Washington, D.C. I'm an engagement producer.
Great, welcome. We had some stations like WAMU who applied to be part of America Amplified, and unfortunately we couldn't take everybody, but I always said you're very welcome to listen into any of the things. So they're on our Slack channel and they're here. All right, guys, we only have a half an hour to teach Daylina everything she needs to know about listening sessions. Who wants to begin?
I can start. And I'll try to be quick. Listening sessions is always kind of a funny term to me, just like engagement is, because it can be defined in so many ways. I think every team kind of has their own way that it can fit into what they're trying to do. When I started in public media, I started with Side Effects Public Media, which is serving in public health. And they were told when, I was the first person to take the position, or one of the first people to take the position, they're like, do listening sessions. And then it was like, well, what's a listening session? Like, what's the goal? Who do we want to hear from? So it's been kind of just like a dive into it and see how it goes when, and Brittany's kind of evolved it because she's in that role now. But when we first started, we were doing listening sessions on specific public health topics such as immigrant health, diabetes, and a lot of other topics. And we would just ask these big, broad questions like, what deserves more attention? What are your goals? What do you think people misunderstand when it comes to your community, however they define their community? So we were just kind of sitting around with a table with like 3 or 4 people on a specific topic, all the reporters, the editor, the engagement person, me, we're all just sitting there kind of learning, taking notes. And then when I shifted roles into our regional journalism collaborative for Indiana Public Broadcasting, we kind of decided to shape them for the team a little differently, where it was like, well, let's have listening sessions with me, a reporter, and a community they want to listen to. It could be, some sort of gap we've identified through the diversity source tracker. It can just be a community that they've never included or heard from. And then we found out, from the questions that we were getting and what type of people, when you ask someone, can you join a listening session with us? I think they have a lot of questions that they may not be able to ask at that time, but what does that mean for you joining us? What are the expectations? So since then we've created for my team, a document that I'm able to share externally. If I email someone to say, will you sit around and talk with us on something we call a listening session? I'm able to share a Google Doc that answers the questions. I'm bringing it up now. Who are we? What is a listening session? Why do we do these listening sessions? What are our goals? What type of questions can you expect us to ask? Because usually they're really broad questions that people might want to take a few minutes to think about, come prepared. And what takes place after a listening session? So, with our listening sessions, we go into it as we want to hear from you, we want to be better at what we do, but that doesn't mean we're going to have, reporting come out in the next week from what we heard. So it was important for us to lay that out for people joining us of what it means, what your role is. We want to create that relationship so they really understand that. We're trying to understand, create a relationship just to be better, and so they can have better relationships with our team. And then also we created I work with a team of 6 reporters. So we also created that same document for my editor, my digital producer, myself, created a document that's internal, answering those same questions. So they know, when we're talking to someone for a listening session, they don't feel like, all right, I need to create a spot from this for tomorrow. It's just, we want you to create better relationships. That's a priority for our team, kind of, in a nutshell. And then we're also defining, and this one's kind of in the work and transforming too, of like, when we do a listening session, how is that different than just having a coffee meeting with one of your sources or, attending an event? Like, how are these different from those sorts of relationships you're also building in ways that you're engaging with the community? So we also did one last year where our group team was in a spot where we could, we tried something where we're asking people just those basic questions, people from lots of different places around the state and different communities that we wanted to hear from to figure out, are the focuses within our beats correct? If we have, a reporter focusing on the environment, how does the community define environment? What do they think deserves more attention? Is our focus within that what the community actually needs and wants? So we kind of changed up listening sessions at the last quarter of last year to really be like, all right, from a big picture goal, is our team answering these questions and really helping the community with the information they're needing? So I think listening sessions can be very small, you and a couple people just listening, or it could just be serving a different purpose where, it's more broad and general for how you're, engaging with those places. So that's kind of in a nutshell, kind of how listening sessions for us have kind of changed, what resources we've needed to create to figure out how they can best serve our team with the engagement we want to do. And I'll pass it off to Brittany if she has anything she wants to share.
Yeah, thank you. Gosh, I'm trying to figure out where to start because that was really thorough, Robin. Thank you. I would say where we're trying to get to on my team is having listening sessions more on a little bit of a rolling basis so that we've always got something kind of cooking. I know I've got reporters right now who are interested in a bunch of different topics that I'd like to start listening sessions on. Think about like starting with a listening session is engagement is kind of a long game. You want to be able to develop trust with the people you want to talk to, get them comfortable enough to share some stuff with you, and you want to be able to aggregate everything you hear in these listening sessions. And sometimes you might need to do multiple on like one subject. You want to be able to aggregate all of that, go through it really thoroughly with your reporters and be like, okay, so what stories did we find in here, and create a plan of coverage. So I would like to get to a point with my team where like the minute we're done with a listening session with one person and we start sort of the aggregating and thematic like identification phase, we're starting the actual listening with another reporter. That's a big one. Another thing I think I would just push is going through trusted community resources. We've got, like right now, I've got someone who's working on reaching out to some refugees over at the local military base where we've got quite a few people who were evacuated from the siege of Kabul when all that went down. So we've got quite a few people who are in a pretty vulnerable position who don't necessarily want to talk to reporters, but who have really important stories worth telling, and who like might need to share some information to help improve their own situations. But because that misunderstanding, distrust, just initial reticence is there, we want to go through a community partner who can either basically do the listening for us or can talk to people and kind of advocate for us to be like, this is what a listening session is. This is how it works. This is sort of like what you're signing up for and what will or won't be quoted. You kind of like lay out the ground rules in advance, and you let the people who have built up trust already and who understand the people that you want to reach, you have them sort of like intercede for you. And hopefully help along with the listening session itself when it happens. Tasha actually just did like a killer job with a really amazing listening session the other night. And I'm going to let her talk about that because she's really good at finding those community partners who can build up trust and invite the people you want to hear from directly into the circle.
Thanks,
Brittany.
Brittany.
Let me break in for 1 sec. So sorry. Would it be helpful, you all, if Robin shared with you the Google Doc that she shares with people when they go to a listening session?
Yes, please.
This is an idea you can steal type of thing. So she'll put it in the chat.
It's called replicating best practices.
Yeah, okay. Replicating best practices, exactly. Go ahead, Tasha, sorry.
I like that. I like that. Hi, everybody. Again, I'm Tasha Gibson. I get to work with Robin and Brittany, and I work with the education reporting team here at WFYI in Indianapolis. And to kind of pick up where Brittany left off, thankfully, I've been able to experiment with listening sessions in different phases of the different parts of the reporting process. So one of the ways that we've experimented with listening sessions is doing them post-publication. So a journalist will do all the reporting, And then after that fact, we gather a group of people who have who are interested in this particular topic and get their reaction to not only the work, but the topic and and to get feedback about where we might want to go next. That's been really fun. And I think it's been helpful to hear reaction, and that extends the reporting so that that particular reporter is in the room virtually and gets to ask questions of people who've, read or thought about this topic and say, well, what about this? And so that's been really cool. I've also had the opportunity to partner with Brittany and do listening sessions pre-publication. So before actually the reporters that I work with even came on board, Brittany showed me the way of listening sessions, and we were able to host a couple of listening sessions around special education. And you might see really clearly why that crosses from education to health. It was kind of one of those topics that transcended kind of a particular desk, and listening to parents and caregivers, and then professionals who are advocating for families who have children with who are receiving special education services was very instructive. And what we ended up doing, thanks to Brittany, was compiling all that feedback that we received, looking for patterns, and then sharing that with my editor, and sharing that with the reporters who were coming on board. So they almost had like a running start, if you will, like with some of the intel that we were gathering from community members. And I'll just mention, one of the listening sessions we did with parents was needed interpretation, Spanish interpretation. And I learned kind of the nuance and the particularity of that. Number one, our trusted community partner for that particular listening session wanted her parents to know well in advance what to expect going into that room, even more so than our English speaking participants. And so there was a special extra step that we built in for that particular community to make them feel comfortable. And then also working with an interpreter was interesting, because I'm used to kind of doing that kind of listening where you're, paraphrasing to make sure that I'm clear on what I'm hearing so that I'm recording accurately what's been shared in the listening session. And with an interpreter, I needed to be sensitive to that, to not make people feel like it was an unnecessary, why are you repeating what I'm saying? And then the interpreter is going to repeat the exact same thing. So there was a special consideration there with an interpreter that I needed to learn how to not duplicate everything. And then I've also done listening finally without any reporting at all, not yet at least. And that's been around kind of critical race theory here in Indiana with some parents in Marion County in particular. And the listening that I did with 3 separate groups of parents, one in a suburb of Indianapolis that's known for kind of being super activists against talking about race and racism in classroom, and then 3 kind of more urban, more metropolitan school districts in Indianapolis, one on the west side, one on the east side, with parents about their thoughts about how teachers should be talking about race and racism. And that listening hasn't informed reporting yet, but it did inform an event that we hosted last week with the teachers union here in Indiana. And so that listening that we did, the responses that we heard from teachers informed the questions that we asked our guest expert during this event last week. So listening throughout the reporting process, that's what I've been experimenting with, and have been fortunate to learn from 2 practitioners who've been at it longer than I have, and Robin and Brittany.
Thank you, Tasha. That's great. It occurs to me, Jennifer and Shane, they're doing this engagement with the Filipino community. They have a reporter coming on in February. You guys can do some talking now and get her off to a running start. I think that would be great. Jennifer has her hand up.
That was going to be my question, because I think a lot of, in general, this is something I struggle with engagement work, is that I'm the editorial leader of the newsroom, and I've been part of my process of like setting goals and, creating beats. Like, I'm doing a lot of this work and then just sort of handing it off to reporters, of saying like, this is what you're going to do, because I've already decided it's a priority. So can some of you who've been doing this work sort of talk about the difference between, the kind of listening you would do with a reporter in the room who was going to do a story versus like doing these listening sessions that aren't just for content and sort of, I mean, it sounds like both of those are totally viable options. They're just really kind of different. And so I think, for this specific project where we need some content to come out of this pretty quickly, because we're trying to get information out for voters. How would you run that listening session? And, what's the difference between having a reporter there or not having a reporter there?
Yeah, I'll say with mine, I've found in my experience, as always told me, always have a reporter I always have a reporter with me when I'm doing a listening session. And I want them honestly to be the person who creates the idea. I'm not an editor, I'm an engagement person on my team. So I'm not going to turn to them and say, I heard this really great thing, let's do a listening session and I'd love for you to report on it. But so a lot of times I'll sit down with a reporter and be like, what are you interested in? Who are you missing? Who is not in your source diversity tracker? And then start talking through what possible listening sessions we can do going forward. But, I found that, if you do a listening session and then share with a reporter, it kind of just sits there and nothing happens from it. And I always feel like I might miss some nuance that they would pick up on as well. So that's something I'd always say about what I do with mine. And I also want to share a document too about how we're talking through that thing that I talked about, like what is a listening session, what isn't. If you're trying to get information for what do voters need, maybe that would be better for a community conversation than a listening session. Brittany, Tasha, anything you wanted to add to that?
It's a really interesting question because it is very openly writing that line between the long-term work engagement does and sort of the long timeline you need to work with versus the very immediate news needs, especially with something as time sensitive as a election. I would say if you have a listening session already planned, what you might want to do if you haven't done a whole lot of communication around it yet is let people know up front that this is a thing reporters will be at. And based on your editorial needs, you should let people know anything said in this session could be quoted, or anything in this session is on background and a reporter might follow up. So just let them know the expectation. I don't think it's technically really a listening session if you're going in with the idea that everything is on the record, because usually you want to be able to make these a safe space where people can be open without feeling like they're about to attach their name to some words that could go in the paper. I say the paper because I came from a print journalism background. But I just set the expectation up front. If you feel like you have the time to let it be on background and then get back in touch with people, that's my preferred method of doing things. But I feel like there's other ways you could do this. I guess it kind of depends. Maybe instead of getting direct quotes from people, you sort of aggregate people's feedback. So there are sticky note activities. If you're doing this in person, there are sticky note activities you could do. I think you could probably replicate them online with people just sort of popcorning ideas around, and you sort of take a look at okay, of the people we have here, about this percentage of people had questions surrounding absentee voting, around this percent of people had questions surrounding what information to trust and where to get it, that kind of thing. And you could report the numbers without necessarily attaching someone's name or face to it. I think you have options. If you want, I can do a little digging because I remember banking some of this stuff during the election, and we didn't get to use all of it because the election was a crazy time.
Rima has a question, but I wanted to give Daylina a chance because she needs to pop off really quickly. If you have any questions, Daylina.
Do you tend to limit the number of people who come to listening sessions? I don't know if it's difficult enough to get a certain number of people to attend, and so that's a non-issue, or if it could get out of control and be difficult for everybody who make it so that people would have a difficult time participating because the time is limited and there might be too many people. How do you handle that?
I personally haven't had to limit participants yet. I haven't run into that issue. However, we have experimented with virtual breakout rooms if we do feel like the group is large. There's a way that that I've been able to kind of create smaller conversations that are moderated by either a CE team member or someone else. So that's one way to get around capacity questions.
Rima.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I was just going to
Robin?
say, if it's in person like they used to be for COVID times, definitely limiting it in person. I think Tasha's found really great ways since she started during the pandemic to do it virtually. But, you know, if you're all going to sit around the table eventually, if we're going to do that again ever, I would say, yeah, maybe like 3 to 4 people with our team always felt like a good number. But virtually, I think, yeah, you can always split it up into rooms like Tasha said. So.
And I know people had questions, you know, really basic questions like, who do you invite? Who do you invite? And if you're going to be partnering with a nonprofit or a community organization in trying to do a listening session, how do you differentiate yourself from their agenda?
Yeah, I'll say one of the first listening sessions I held was with a group called the Indiana Minority Health Coalition. And something that came out of that was the need, and it was their priority to do maternal and infant mortality within Indiana. And we ended up doing some reporting on it. We ended up doing a couple community conversations on it. And, you know, we had, you know, our reporters and partners who were in reporting, like moderate the conversation, do reporting up to it, and then really involved them in the conversation and let them kind of lead us to some sources and things like that. So, you know, we did it in partnership with them, but it never felt like, and we never got any feedback that, you know, we were somehow propagating their agenda, what they're advocating for at the State House and things like that. It was always like, oh, this is a worthy cause to, you know, bring attention to. So let's do, you know, our reporting, host conversations, but never kind of those things we were normally allowed to do, just let them know we're partnering on it. But that doesn't, you know, any of the partnerships we've had, that one did, you know, result in a partnership. Other times we're just kind of like, you know, there to have them lead us to people who can help and make sure that we're balanced in other ways as well. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Rima had a question.
So Robin and team, it sounds like you guys are totally kick-ass now in terms of how you do this, and it's part of your work. But kind of KTOO and WSHU were at the start of this. So what were the mistakes that you made in the beginning? So both Jennifer and I don't mess up. Sorry, Jennifer, I thought I just put it out there for both of us.
Yeah, I'll go since I consider myself still kind of a rookie. I started in this position last January. I mean, I did learn a lot about working with people on background. I do wish I would have recorded the conversations, and I didn't record any of them. We had note takers. I've had note takers for every listening session, but I haven't recorded any of them. And with permission, with consent, I wish I would have done that so that my team, the team that I work with of reporters, could hear people in their own voice, share feedback. Another mistake I think is, you know, not involving reporters. Of course, with the special education listening sessions, I didn't have any yet. They were still being onboarded, but I think having them in the room and would have been helpful. So those are two things that come to mind immediately for me.
Yeah, I'd say have a plan for follow-up. Like, know what you're gonna do. Like, if you're gonna say we wanted to sit on it and then follow up in a week, put it on your calendar, because it's easy to fall through the cracks, but it needs to be priority. So I would say before going into the listening session, have some follow-up set with your team. And then also just sharing with your team. I remember one of my early listening sessions when I was new, one of the reporters, we were doing one about diabetes. We had a pediatric physician in there talking to us, and one of the reporters ended up asking, well, what is diabetes? And I was like, oh my gosh, this is not a question. You have this person who has all this knowledge and information. You're asking them what diabetes is. So maybe like, share, these are the type of questions we want to ask. We want to stay on topic. Like if it's something you can Google, don't ask. I don't think you need to say that usually, but you know, always have a plan for follow-up and make sure everyone kind of is on, I guess everyone is on the same page of what type of questions you want to ask and just kind of let it flow from there. So, you know, everyone knows what the goal and, you know, objective is.
Yeah, I would echo the follow-up thing. When I first got this position and first started doing listening sessions, it was my first time in an engagement position. So I was just told, do listening sessions. And I was like, I guess I'll figure out what that is. And so I did a couple on like a couple of different topics. One of that really stands out was like just the financial pressures that face rural hospitals, which was a difficult one. Like it ended up getting like a couple of like big thinkers from like an economic standpoint in a room. And nothing happened with it. Like we got a lot of really interesting information, but nobody did anything with it. And I felt really bad that I felt like I had wasted the time of the people who came in, and like it was really good knowledge to have and good background that did come up. Like eventually, like there was eventually like some stories about rural hospitals and just the different pressures that they face and how hard it is for them to stay open sometimes. But for a long time, it just didn't. And what came out eventually wasn't necessarily connected to the listening session. So working with your editor, some of you guys are the editors, and figuring out how to make sure that these listening sessions result in something, I think is really important, having that plan. And there are creative ways of doing this where it doesn't necessarily have to result in a story sometimes. And this is something that we're still kind of experimenting with, but that I've seen like done really well in other places. Gosh, there was one in Texas that I love. I'm gonna have to find it and send it. But you can do it in like a Twitter thread, like, hey, we had a listening session. We talked to this many people from blank area or blank profession. And here are some of the themes that emerged from our conversation, just to show people that like, hey, we are listening to you and we are doing stuff with this information. And then if anything comes out of it, like make sure you send it back to the people who participated so that they see a demonstrated like commitment to follow through with the time and the information that they shared with you. That's for me like the biggest part, just making sure that like you do something with what you get.
Seems like there's a balance to find between sort of like being extractive and, you know, doing it just to get content, which seems bad, versus like, but wasting people's time is on the other end of that, where you don't do anything with it. And probably everything that comes out of this sort of is somewhere in between, you know, those two extremes, right?
Yeah, I very much agree. And not every listening session ends up being great when it comes to getting something that you can use afterward. But I think the repeated presence and the demonstrated interest is really important. So, and that's a really hard balance to strike. The newspaper where I worked, they had one event that actually did a really interesting job with this. There was a reporter who did a regular feature called My Favorite Ride, and it was about old cars. And so what she would do is she would have this breakfast like once a quarter, like they would order donuts and get coffee, and all these people with these classic cars would come hang out in the parking lot, and she would talk to them and get stories about their cars that she would then like draw from over the next couple of months whenever she needed a feature to come out. But she also, because these people tended to live out in the county, a little bit more rural, she also used these conversations to sort of seed the ideas for other investigative stories. And it was a pretty informal event. It was just breakfast and chatting. Not every conversation resulted in a story. Not every My Favorite Ride breakfast ended up yielding a lot of features, but the regularity really helped get her name out there, get this established as like a well-known event. And I think overall, in the aggregate, did pay really good dividends. Yeah. I don't know if that's possible for everybody. It's kind of a big commitment, but once you get that ball rolling, for her, it ended up being really useful.
I have to pop off, so I'm going to leave this to you all to carry on and keep asking questions. Thanks.
Catherine,
I
I saw you
love,
had your thing up.
yeah,
hand up.
thank you. I love that idea of that my favorite ride and the event and like slowly over time, like that is really inspiring. So what I wanted to ask is, how do you kind of balance the priorities of listening sessions versus community conversations? You know, both are so important, but with these smaller teams that might not have a dedicated engagement person, I'm just trying to think through, you know, the building relationships with groups that we're not connected with already versus, you know, all of these really important topics that we could be bringing to a bigger discussion, and even, you know, airing or distributing somehow.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we do have examples, like I mentioned earlier, of a listening session sparking a community conversation, you know, based upon what we heard at the listening session. And then they can help you bring the right people to the conversation to share. But, you know, both are time consuming. I will say listening sessions seem like an easier lift, and usually they are, but sometimes they aren't. So I think it could just be, you know, setting some easy goals at the beginning, like, you know, I know Brittany has set some goals this year with like how many listening sessions she wants to do this year with her reporters, and you know, how many community conversations do we want to do? I mean, maybe just setting goals at the beginning and trying to figure out what realistically can you do with your time, or if you're just trying to, yeah, and I think they could feed off of each other. Maybe you have a community conversation where you meet people to do a listening session with too. I think they could probably go either way. But yeah, listening sessions can be time consuming, as can community conversations. So I would just say making sure you have the time to do them. And we do have to figure out a balance, like our goals for the year, right? How many listening sessions can we do and how many community conversations that are public do we want to do? And just be real and realistic with ourselves to make sure they're meaningful. And also that we'll, you know, be able to complete the goal.
So I had a question to follow up on that, Robin. When you all do your community conversations, what outcomes are you looking from them different from your listening sessions?
Yeah, I'd say with community conversations, of course, we always make sure to try to get people to fill out a survey on their way out. And so we want to make sure that we've raised awareness on an issue, or if it's people who work with the issue, did they learn something new? Did they make a new connection? Those are the type of questions that we ask with our community conversations, or that I have asked previously with the community conversations. And with the listening sessions, it's more focused on our team and, you know, the people that we're talking with. Like, was this conversation helpful in your reporting and your understanding of this specific community? Hopefully it can be helpful to the people that are joining us for a listening session as well, that they can have a relationship and feel like they can communicate openly with us. So I would say with the listening sessions, it's more one-on-one relationship based. With the community conversation, we're trying to make sure we serve some sort of need in the community about raising people's awareness, information they have, or creating connections to people that they can connect with.
Thanks.
So as like just to follow up with that, just like as an example, right now, Robin and I are working on like a series of basically community conversations that we are working with a group called Indiana Legal Services. The housing crisis around here is really terrible. Lots of people are like facing eviction or like getting taken to court. And it is a bit of a mess. People don't necessarily know what they're supposed to be doing if they get like a court summons, or if they run behind on their rents, or if they need some kind of legal help when it comes to housing. So we've been holding these events where basically we just kind of book the venue and make sure invitations get sent out. The housing people end up doing most of the work, where they go in, they say, okay, if you get summoned to court, here's basically kind of what you need to know. And if you are in need of housing resources, these are the kinds of things that you can get. And that ends up like, that's information that goes out to them that they can use. And then during the Q&A, we will usually just take really careful notes and go back to the reporters and say, okay, so these are some of the themes that emerged. We don't have any context because these people came in to get help and we didn't want to like pump them for quotes because that felt gross. But here are some of the themes that emerged. Here are some of the common questions that people keep having. And we've learned a lot of really interesting stuff through that kind of thing. But that's sort of it. Like with the community conversation, it was going sort of out to them and not coming in to us, if that makes sense. Erin has her hand up. But she also just turned off her camera, so I don't know if she stepped away.
Can I jump in with a question really quick? I want to talk about outreach a little bit. I think one of the goals of this is to reach people who are hopefully or very potentially not listeners, or people who are very aware of KTOO. So this goes back to sort of building that list, but like, what strategies do you do to reach people who don't know you exist?
Gosh, just like lots of emails and calls, sometimes you don't get responses and that's okay. And, I think one time I've been told by someone, no, I don't want to join a listening session. And, I think that's why we created that document. So people had something they could look to, because as we know, like when I call people or try to explain them in emails, something will always get missed or it might be confusing. So having that kind of consistency with like a document you can share with them, whether you print it and hand it to them or, or you're able to email it or something, that's pretty helpful. And then when I was reading it, the first thing is like, who are we? I think explaining who you are, who's on your team, why we're interested in hearing from you is, so important, especially like you said, if they aren't a part of, they aren't your readers, they aren't your audience. So, I think it's just having something ready to explain to them who you are, what you're doing, will be really important. Because a lot of the people we invite into these listening sessions definitely are not, our audience, the audience that people we're already communicating with easily and can pick up the phone and hear from. So I think consistency will be important, especially that's why I mentioned that follow-up, so they don't feel like, all right, we're bringing you into this listening session and bye, thanks for the information type of thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one of the things I really want to experiment with is using call outs about a particular issue, using call outs on social media about a particular issue with a question about, do you want to see future reporting from us, or would you be willing to be contacted by WFYI in the future? So getting people, allowing them to opt in to future contacts, and then allowing that to kind of cultivate potential listening session participants. So using a call out about a particular issue for me, the team that I'm working with, it's a community college. We want to know about people's experience, whether or not they graduated, if they had any obstacles, that kind of thing. And I'm watching that list thanks to one of the reporters I work with, Dylan, who's thinking like, I want to keep up with them. So I'm going to ask them this particular question. Can we contact you again? Not just for sourcing, but for me, I'm thinking about that for future listening sessions. And the people that are responding to the call out, they may be followers of us, but they may not be listeners or readers. And so I think that's something that I really am excited to experiment with. Like, again, it's time consuming, it's slow, but it's another way of getting to people who may not be in the close, who may not be already listeners and readers. Brittany, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's okay. I'm going to add on to that. And then Erin, if you still had a question, we can go to you. And then Tom is unmuted, so I think he would like to ask a question too. What I was just going to add was, as a reporter, you probably find it really helpful to just ask a source, like, who else should I be talking to? That is also a question you could definitely ask when you are forming a listening session. For when we are working with partners who sort of like, so I'm just going to use the housing example just because it's really top of mind for me. When we're doing a project with them, we're like, okay, what other questions should we be asking about the overall housing situation, and who should we be talking to who is affected by this issue? And while we might not have direct like contact with people who are currently going through like housing loss? They do. And sometimes they will put us in touch. So I would say really lean on your community partners to be that conduit for you. Tasha did, again, like an amazing job of this with the education listening sessions. She found a community partner. It was Aura. What was the name of the group, Tasha?
Gala.
The Gala, yes. And this was like a primarily like Spanish language, like special education support group. They didn't listen to WFYI. We'd never heard of this group before, and they definitely hadn't heard of us, but Tasha made a connection and a relationship with Aura, who went to the mothers in this group and said, hey, these reporters would really like to talk to you to understand some of the issues you faced getting help for your kids. And like having her trust and having her advocacy for us really helped get them in the room and shed light on some things that we just did not expect that led to some really interesting stories. I think some of them talked to us on background. I don't know if any of them ended up like quoted directly. I don't think any of them wanted to be on the record, but because we knew those things were happening, we were able to find people who would give voice to those experiences on the record with their name attached. Erin, did you have a question still?
I did. I'm sorry, I had to step out. So if this was already answered, I apologize. Can you talk a bit about platforms and tools you use for these? I'm curious to know how it's working, especially during pandemic times.
We've just done old-fashioned on our team, like Google Meets, emails, calls, very informal, and Tasha has done more of the virtual listening sessions with bigger groups and tried different methods.
Yeah, involuntarily, fortunately had to didn't get the luxury of doing it in person yet, but certainly Zoom with the breakout room function. And yeah, just having a note taker there who can be present, maybe not on camera, but definitely being explicit that there's someone here taking notes for internal use only, for like newsroom use only. But yeah, that's how I've been conducting them so far, just via Zoom, despite all of the Zoom fatigue.
Tasha also left a note in the chat about using like a Google form to call out sources and invite them in. And this is also a listening method. It's not like a 1 hour where you all sit down and talk to each other, but this was really informative for her team. It was about teacher burnout, right, Tasha?
That's right, teacher shortages. And then right now we have one active around one of the community colleges here in Indiana. Yeah.
I was wondering.
Oh God.
I think Tom and then Lily.
Yeah, you're good.
Sorry. I was wondering, you had mentioned working with partners. Have you ever worked with other media partners who, either online or print or what have you, whose audiences are the communities you want to reach? Advantages to that, disadvantages maybe?
That is such a good question. I'm so glad you asked. And the answer is yes, we are definitely working on expanding those, but we do have several partnerships with the communities we want to reach. So Side Effects actually shares a reporter, we call her our health equity reporter, with the Indianapolis, with its oldest Black-owned newspaper that serves a primarily Black audience that doesn't really listen to the radio, that we know from our demo, like our listening demographics doesn't listen to the radio. But what Farah, that's her name, what she does is she works with the editor of the Indianapolis Reporter to sort of identify like reporting priorities. She will do stories, written stories for the paper that she then adapts for radio stories. And what she's been doing lately is focusing very particularly in like a very specific zip code and talking to people in this neighborhood that basically used to be a really thriving center of the African-American community here and was deliberately like all of its resources were sort of divested or moved out. And so it wasn't able to maintain itself because of the structural issues that were put in place to make that happen. And so far has been talking to people in this neighborhood and has learned a lot about like how the city put in a lot of resources to make this very pretty park. But the neighborhood doesn't feel like they can really use it because they feel like it's more for richer white people, and they don't feel quite welcome in it. And that's something she uncovered through her reporting. And I don't know if we would have gotten that if we hadn't had the partnership with the recorder. One thing we're working on right now is I have some relationships with a couple Spanish language newspapers and a Spanish language podcast out in the rest of the state. And when we have stuff that we think would be useful for their audience, we typically send it to them. Recently, one of our reporters did a series on outbreaks, like COVID outbreaks at meatpacking plants. And meatpacking plants have a large percentage of workers from outside the country, not like most of whom speak Spanish, but many of whom speak Spanish. That's like a big demographic in that workforce. And so we wanted to make sure that, like, since we had reported on that community, the community got to see it. So we contacted the Spanish language newspapers. We had Spanish versions of the stories, and they were able to run both versions of the story. We also sent it to the Spanish language podcast, and I don't know if they've done anything with it yet, but they were definitely interested in getting it. We did a listening session with the Spanish language podcast about a year and a half ago. That went okay. It was a very good effort, and everyone got COVID in the last leg of it. So it's not a very good case study, but I would say those kinds of partnerships are very worth the time and effort it takes to create them.
Thank you.
Lily.
We've gotten to do a couple listening sessions and kind of some community engagement stuff in the last year, obviously through America Amplified and some other projects that we've been doing. And it sounds like, Brittany, you guys have a lot of the same like rural issues, which is so nice to hear other people talk about. But one of the things that we've been doing to get people to like hear from listeners is just letting people call in and leave a voicemail. We have like a special voicemail box set up to have people be able to do that, especially because a lot of our listeners are older. And so they weren't able to kind of figure out some of the other stuff. So that's been kind of something that we learned as we started doing more engagement, particularly around COVID when that was first happening and people were trying to figure things out. Do you guys have any other methods that you're kind of thinking about as we continue to be in this COVID space, especially in like a more rural area where maybe internet access is not so good and Zoom is not ideal?
Well, I'll say that Robin and Brittany make good use of this tool, and I'd love for one of y'all to elaborate because I'm not familiar. I want to get into it, but it's called Public Input, and it's a text messaging tool where they're able to gather responses from the community or questions from the community. And so that's a distributed listening strategy where it's not pulling people together to kind of get energy from each other, but I think that's like something that's pretty cool that they've been experimenting with. And actually just recently Side Effects published a piece by one of our writers that basically responded to those questions. Robin's done the same thing with the digital editor. Questions will be sent in and someone actually writes up something. So I think that's something that comes to mind. Robin and Brittany, did I characterize that accurately?
Yeah, we're throwing spaghetti at the wall because of COVID with a little bit of everything. It's like we're trying texting. That text tool also allows us to put question boxes in our stories, which I'm sure you've all seen. So we're doing that around different types of questions. We're asking, what information are you looking for when it comes to the coronavirus? We have one for our legislative session, which is happening now. What do you want to know about bills and what's happening at the State House? We have just a general one, like what information do you want to know right now? What questions do you have? We're trying to gather questions, not have people throwing crazy comments into our stories, but that's been super helpful to our team to know what themes people are needing at the time. So, we're doing the texting, we're doing the question boxes. I've done voicemails in the past, and those are great too, especially for those people that, don't have access to or can't figure out technology. Something we've thought about doing, and I've never tried this before, and I think the listening posts are the people that we saw do this, is, we already have this texting platform that we use. What if we put like just these plain signs with like a question on them, just a general question about a topic you're looking for, and then just say, text us at this number to share. And I'm dying to try this out, and I haven't tried it, but I think the listening post has done it and had some success with it. And then you can just put that around communities you want to hear from some of the zip codes you think, maybe they live in, or put them up at churches or grocery stores or something like that people are still going to. That's one method I'd like to try in the future that I haven't tried. But yeah, we're just kind of experimenting with anything we can because, COVID keeps coming at us. So yeah, if you guys hear of anything interesting, let us know too.
That's something I've always wanted to try too. And I've been thinking about, like, it's the closest thing to like an in real life thing we can do, because it's like physical, but it's also socially distanced. It's just like a piece of paper that you have to respond to. But I don't know about where you live, but like the grocery store still, like when you walk in next to the shopping carts, there's a bulletin board with a bunch of things with the pull tabs, with the phone number on them. And I'm just like, who uses these? But like they're getting used, and it seems like a really great pre-baked way to communicate with people. And I like to think about like how mind-blowing it would be to be like, there's all these things, and then there's like KTOO, you rip off the text message or the number and contact your local public radio station, and like Craigslist or something.
My question was along the lines of the text engagement. Have you all done anything of reaching out to different Facebook groups or like community Facebook groups? And what has worked for you on social media around engagement for outreach, and whether it's community conversations or the listening sessions?
Yeah, we had when people were needing unemployment, they were trying to figure out if they were going to get payment right when everything was shutting down. Our workforce reporter was a part of a couple different Facebook groups that had popped up, and we actually ended up partnering with one of the bigger ones in the state for a community conversation to update them on what's happening, what to expect, what are your, people needed to know, what happens if I get denied with my unemployment claim. And, it was crazy around that time. I'm sure lots of you guys dealt with that too with your state unemployment system. So if there's a really big topic like that, we found it really useful and engaging to have just like a Facebook conversation that you co-host with them to reach all of their people. That's one way that we've engaged with Facebook groups. We did try, my team also created this, we created a group alongside of our first text group that was a closed Facebook group, and we just didn't get engagement from it. Like we were asking the same types of questions, if we were following this education topic, like when it comes to, this topic, like what questions do you have? What type of reporting do you want to see on it? We would get like 50 responses through text and then like nothing through our closed Facebook group. So we ended up letting that one go. But again, that was when we didn't have any community partners other than we didn't have any community partners with that. So I think just always finding one that's already well established. They have people who have information they want to know was helpful with engaging with us. But that's the only thing we've kind of tried from an engagement standpoint, other than reporters just joining them to, find people to talk to and share their stories.
Yeah, Brittany has done, like, in addition to Robin's great work on Facebook Live, Brittany's also hosted Facebook Lives. Thank you, Jennifer. And I just wanted to plug an idea, pairing reporting with some sort of screening. So, that's not really social media, but it's like, and Brittany, you can say more about this, but like, having something about environmental pollution, screening like a doc about it, and then having a conversation after that. Thank you. So yeah, that's another thing that we've that Brittany's tested out. I know I'm really pumped to be working with Robin right now on some Twitter Spaces experiments, inviting the community to submit questions before our conversation each week during the legislative session. The routine of that feels good, like a space where people can know that, oh, I know I'm going to get updated on what happened regarding education matters at the State House, but also giving people a vehicle or a way to submit their questions, which could inform future reporting. So I kind of am very eager to see how that'll work. Again, another distributed listening, not bringing everyone together to talk about a particular topic. With Twitter Spaces, as you know, you're in listener mode unless you're invited to be a speaker. So yeah, I'm excited to learn from that. So those are some other things that we're testing.
Thanks so much. The WSHU team needs to bounce, actually, because we have other meetings. So I just wanted to thank you all very much.
Oh, glad you're here. Thanks, everybody.
Yep, this has been
Thank
absolutely
you.
tremendous. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So many great ideas.
We're all on Slack. So if anybody has any future questions, just reach out, y'all. Thank you so much.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.